know if you're on Facebook and if you have friended people and you consider them friends and you count them in the hundreds or thousands, but today we're going to find out what real friendship is about. And I think they've overused that word friend, and we want to get back to what is it to be a chaver? What is it to be in relation to somebody? And what's your responsibility to form that connection? So I'm going to invite my new friend, for real, Daniel Yalowitz, to dive into one of his two books, both of which I've just bought, Reflections on the Nature of Friendship and Journeying with Your Archetypes, The Search for Deeper Meaning in Daily Life. Both of these I look forward to reading, and today I would just tempt us with some nuggets of wisdom that we can take away. Daniel.
Well, thanks. Thanks so much. I'm so pleased to be here with this intimate crowd today. And I also bring my greetings from my synagogue community way back in Greenfield, Massachusetts, with Rabbi Andrea, who sends her regards. And so I'm delighted to have this opportunity to, as Rabbi Alicia said, to dig in to friendship from many different levels. And I welcome comments and questions, and the opportunity. I want to welcome also the opportunity for you all to speak to your own experience as I talk about different aspects. And we'll touch on a number of elements that are in the book, but of course I won't be able to read the book to you in a little bit over an hour. But I see this as being an interactive opportunity rather than me just lecturing. So with that in mind, the first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to give some context, because any book, any story, any life, it has its own narrative. And it seems to me that this one is a fairly curious one. Once I had a chance to finish the book and put it out there and then reflect on what did I do, I realized that this came at a time that I could not have predicted. I started writing it fairly close to the day of January 1st, 2020. And of course, we didn't know what we know now about COVID and things that have shot off from it. And it started because just a few weeks earlier, I had spent a few weeks in the People's Republic of China, which I had been doing every year, doing a 10-day workshop, facilitating a 10-day workshop on advanced theories in intercultural communication. And so I felt befriended by some of the 160 folks who showed up to that 10-day workshop. And that was kind of a very meaningful experience for me. Because of course, I mean, I've been to China before, but I've never had that kind of in-depth connection and relationship building with folks. And it ran pretty deep. People really began to write to me and want to have more information than I was able to convey in the time that I had. And so I wanted to write something about the power of friendship. But then COVID struck, and the way it hit me directly was that two of the students in that course passed away very quickly from COVID, shortly after heading home to their home city of Wuhan. And, it just gave me pause to reflect on this as I was writing. And I wanted to pivot and think about the implications of COVID and epidemics and so on, things that we had never experienced before in our lifetime. And while most folks were really focusing on the medical and the physiological aspects of COVID, because of course that was critical, I was more invested as an intercultural and developmental psychologist. I was more interested in the psychological, the social and the emotional aspects of what COVID was doing and what it was doing to individuals, couples, families, and so on. And so I did a fair amount of research throughout the first couple of years on COVID, which sadly enough doesn't appear in the book, but I think it's important to understand the context here. And what I found was that there are several constituent communities, if you will, that struggled around maintaining their friendships, some more than others. And I just want to kind of share a little bit on that with you. And then I'll get into reading some of the pieces in the book that I'd like to share with you and take a quick tour or journey through the book. And again, inviting your questions and your comments on your experience, especially if you disagree with what I'm saying. I'd love to hear that. And just see where it goes. I've done day-long workshops on this. I'll try to compact it as much as I can into just about an hour. But what COVID has left us with, and here I'm speaking globally, is that people are both hungrier and lonelier for friendship and connected relationship than they were beforehand. And that's for a number of reasons. One is many of us have lost people, and not through the natural design, if you will, but through the artifice of an invasive epidemic. And again, that's not something we've had experience with in this way. And we had no preparation for this. So there's nothing in our lives that really accounts for losing people in this way. And there are some groups, as I said, that I think have struggled around the social and emotional values and benefits of friendship than others. For one, older folks, and I don't put an age on that. I let people self-define. And I saw this with my aging parents, who struggled terrifically in a 70-year marriage those last couple of years, because they had no outside input. They were fully dependent on each other in a way where neither was really fully able to give because of physical limitations, mostly. And of course, I, as their oldest child, and my two younger brothers, had no opportunity to visit with them. And they did not have the technological prowess to work the way we are now, or even as something as simple as FaceTime, not that that's simple, or Zoom or WhatsApp or a number of the other platforms. And we tried to teach them virtually, and that had virtually no impact. So their isolation was their loss and ours. And I suspect that that's not an isolated situation. I think that many older folks really struggled with how to maintain friendship, and were at a loss for how to do that without visitation, contact in 3D, and so on. And I think that impact was not only psychological, but I think it affected people's physical health as well. And that doesn't even speak to those who ended up in the hospital for various illnesses, whether COVID or not. So I think it's had a profound effect on relationship building and maintenance for older folks. Another group, and this may be more obvious to some of us who are or who have raised children, is children have struggled and suffered, and not just for the obvious concerns around schooling and socialization and acculturation. Greetings. Good to see you again.
You too.
But the idea that we've all heard about the epidemic of obesity, for example, and we've had to struggle with seeing that epidemic played out in ever larger measures. And because children didn't have the structure, the supervision that they had before COVID. I mean, that structure really was obliterated. And there was no way of knowing what children really needed without the structured socialization of school. So that was another area that, or another constituency group that really struggled and has continued to, not just, as I said, not just with the schooling, but as well with the idea of how to play. I mean, the Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget talked about play as being the work of childhood, but kids couldn't play together, masked or unmasked. I mean, many parents held their kids back from even outdoor recreation, and certainly there was very little indoor recreation. So that's another group that not only has suffered, but is continuing to struggle to rebuild friendships, to reconnect to their peer classmates and other folks. Interestingly enough, a third group that I found was that men in particular had a hard time because the places, and I'm speaking about a segment of men, I can't speak for all men because that's a fairly large group, just as all elderly or all children. But for men who generally socialized in environments that are typical or traditional more for men than for women, bars, gyms, clubs, moose, elks, etc., gone, no opportunity to engage with those cold turkey. And without that, folks who depended on that for their social infrastructure were lost, as well as any athletic activities and so on. I know I lost the two choruses that I was singing in, and if that had been all I had, that would have been a much larger loss. But those kinds of social, recreational activities, without those, what I found in my research, and this part is more US based, is that men have and continue to struggle. There are still articles coming out. There was one in the New York Times a few months ago. There was one, I think, in Time Magazine just a few weeks ago. That the loss of those social opportunities for men has continued to haunt men's abilities to, again, build, maintain, sustain friendships. So those are three of the populations in particular that I think have struggled. And were I writing my book now, as opposed to 2 years ago, these foci would be much more greatly developed. But we didn't know this as COVID was developing. So I wanted to just add that in as a kind of a prelude to the book itself. The good news, if there is good news to be found in COVID at all, is that those friendship dyads or pairings that have made it through COVID are all the more intimate. I'll talk about intimacy in a bit, but I want to just say in the outset that the power and the measure of any friendship is not when things are well between people. It's when there's challenge and conflict. And, if you look at your own relationship history, you know that the ability to move through the challenges that come up for one or both in a dyadic friendship are extremely powerful because they test our fragility, they test our vulnerability, and they add to our resiliency. And that's true whether it's a marriage, a couple, people who are friends on any basis. And I'll speak about friendship in a particular way that disengages it from other forms of human relationships in a bit. But I just want to start off with the big picture. So again, if there is good news, it's having survived the tests and the challenges of COVID, because I think that, and we'll look at conflict a little bit later as well, but the opportunity to work through conflict and challenge is nothing less than transformative. And I've seen many of my friendships, whether they're intercultural and those around the world or those next door, have been transformed because of COVID. So I just want to say that, and that may or may not be true for you, and it may not be something, it may or may not be something you want to talk about, but it's what I have found going forward. That said, I'd like to say a little bit about a journey in the book itself, or through the book itself. And that is that I want to say that I start with the universals. My thinking as an intercultural psychologist is that I'm interested in the idea of whether or not there are human universals, and if so, what they are, and what makes them universal. And then I go from the larger level universals to the more specific, working and walking through culture, idiosyncratic human behaviors, and then to that which is individual and unique to all of us. So the first chapter talks about our relational world. And human beings, we could debate this because we all have examples where this is not true. But I do believe that human beings are relational beings. Now, I compare that on a continuum to those on another level who are more transactional. And you might be able to think maybe of some local or perhaps national politicians, among others, who you might consider to be more transactional. But the book was written toward the notion of relationship and relational being. So what I wrote in chapter 1, Our Relational World, is that friendship is an evolving process, an ongoing negotiation between two or more individuals. Regardless of where a particular friendship is at a given moment, it is a human relationship of choice, and it's one that is co-created on a continuous basis. The markers that we share with one another help to define the role and the value of any particular friendship. Much as many animals do, human beings tend to carefully plot and mark their social territory. For example, people may mark their friendships through tokens of affection and appreciation, gifts of service, of affect, emotional support, physical artifact, time shared, physical proximity, rituals, and celebration. I imagine a lot of that happens in your temple community, in your synagogue, as it does in mine. But it's not limited just to that. People may also decide to mark a relationship in decidedly darker ways. And this relates to Jung's concept of the shadow, in the light and in the dark. Those darker ways may be a lack of communication, including both a paucity of initiation and responsiveness, silence, sarcasm, passive aggressiveness, and hostility. These behaviors are not always conscious. Sometimes it is a lack of awareness that causes them. This affects people's lives in both an ephemeral and longer lasting manner. Let me talk a little bit more about universals. And I talked on Friday at the Sedona Public Library about my other book, Journeying with Your Archetypes, and had a discussion with folks there about whether beyond life and death, are there universals? Are there things that all peoples and all places across time and culture have experienced? And people throw out all kinds of ideas. And it's just a fascinating discussion. And for myself, I've allowed in a couple of them, at least from my own thinking. And if anyone here has thoughts on this, I would love to have that discussion, at least briefly. One thing that happens to all of us that we can both adapt to and to a certain extent advocate for and make happen is change and transformation. There is no human life that does not go through that. How it happens, when it happens, in what ways it happens, those may be a little bit more unique and individual, but there are markers, there are rituals and rites of passage that most, maybe not all cultures celebrate, but all human beings evolve through. Someone said love the other day, and I leave it to you to make your own decision about that. I would love to be an optimist and say, yes, love is a universal human emotion. However, I do have friends in other countries, particularly those that I have connected with. One in a chapter on with a young woman who lives in Afghanistan, others that I have friends in Pakistan, and others in countries that are war-torn. And I think that they would say, and they have shared with me, that they wish it were true, but they cannot say that all human beings have love for others. And that could be a contentious point, but I just want to point out. But the idea of universals, I think, is important when you think about friendship, because then it raises the question, do all people have friends? And I would imagine that in this small and intimate group here, both folks gathered around the table and those listening in, I think most of us would say yes. I have friends. I've gained friends, I've lost friends, I've changed friends, but I have friends.
We do have a hand up, so.
Oh, yes, okay.
Richard, why don't you, let's do a couple of things here. Why don't you unmute yourself first? And I'm gonna reset the autofocus here so that the owl is swiveling. Okay,
So I have a question in terms of love. I think that it is a universal in terms of people seeking love, which is different than people loving all the other people. You can hate other people, but still have a need for love. And I guess I would say even Adolf Hitler had a girlfriend. I mean, the fact remains, on a human level, he still needed approval. He still needed a relationship, somebody who, at the very end, he married and they committed suicide together. So even somebody as villainy as a Hitler may hate the rest of the world, but on a certain human level, he needed that interpersonal dimension.
Richard, I think you raise a really interesting point, and I think there are some definitions that may need to come into play here, and maybe we have the time later to come back to it. But then the question is, what is love? How does one define love? How does one live love? I would agree that all human beings need, I'd love to say that it's love. I'd love to say all human beings need love. We all need care, we all need support, we all need nurturance to make it through. Love is, I think, a special exception. And I would love to agree with you, but I have known people who have said that they have seen others grow up with no love whatsoever, as they define the term. But we all need other human beings to be engaged with and involved with us as we evolve through our lifespan. But it's an interesting discussion. I don't have the final word on it. But again, that's part of the challenge of this part of thinking about our relational world. But again, beyond love, which I think is questionable, and I'd love to be one who goes with that, are there others? Let's come back to that in a little bit, perhaps, if you're interested in talking more about it. But there's no question that the human journey through the human lifespan, birth to death, cradle to grave, is one of transformation, of change, of growth, of development. And then as we get more and more specific, it's the how, what, when, and where that becomes more unique. That it happens, no question. And that's because we are relational beings. Let me go on. And in chapter 3, which I label Finding Ourselves, Seeking One Another, I say, I would argue that in finding ourselves, which itself is a lifelong, dynamic, and evolving process, we simultaneously attract and seek out others with whom to share lives on an ongoing basis. In so doing, we are committing ourselves to the search for wholeness, something that Jung called the process of individuation. Again, I've written a book about Jung, and that's a different discussion, but the process of individuation. To be whole, he has written, is to see and seek others for how we are in them, how they are in us, and how to build relationships from that very place. Again, an interactive relational dynamic. We hold the gold that we seek in others. Our choice of friends and the choices in our friendships help to manifest and burnish this gold within. Similarly, others have their own and different gold aligned uniquely within them. Their friends will find ways to help them bring forth their gold into the world as well. Perhaps we might refer to this process as the alchemy of friendship. We can kind of get very concrete about what friendship is and what it's not, and so on. But no matter what we say about friendship, and what makes the idea of building a definition so difficult, is that there's something else in it that to me is larger than definition. It's larger than what is tangible and definable. One can call it magic, one can call it mystery, But there's something about how we find ourselves being intimate and caring and loving with a friend that is beyond words. And I'm sure that you've sat in those transformative moments where you feel so held by someone, or you feel that you're holding someone so deeply that it becomes inexplicable. That's what I call the alchemy of friendship. There's magic and there's mystery to it, as well as hardcore facts. We can talk about that as well. Let me see what else I want to say about that. Again, in chapter 3, finding ourselves seeking one another, I write, as we grow into this increasingly complex and fascinating self, part of our growth is about reaching out to others and receiving their friendship. As the second half of this chapter's title suggests, we are seeking one another and being sought out by each other as well. This is concurrent with coming into our identities. It is not necessary for the latter to happen before the former occurs. This is precisely why we befriend new people, with both similarities to and profound differences from one another throughout the entirety of our lives. Our choices of friends are a direct mirror and reflection of how we see ourselves. Back to Jung's concept of individuation. It supports the notion that human beings are always evolving. We develop throughout our entire lifespan, not merely when we're young. We become increasingly self-aware of what we perceive that we need, want, savor, and support, and of what we see as our gaps, our incompleteness, and our hopes for a better future. But make no mistake, friendship is not exclusively an external process involving other people. Jung's statement may feel both paradoxical and intuitive. After all, isn't friendship about making friends and becoming friends with other people? My response is, well, yes, but not entirely. The celebrated Jungian author and analyst Thomas More writes about befriending our shadow. Our lesser known self with all the deep and dark secrets we try to hide from both ourselves and others. Others have written about becoming friends with ourselves in all of our glory and imperfections. In fact, it has been said that the most difficult person to become lifelong friends with is ourselves. We are more judgmental of ourselves than we are toward virtually all others. I don't know if that's true for you or anyone here. But I hear this over and over again, both in my teaching and my private practice. People have the greatest amount of difficulty getting along with themselves, making peace with themselves, and living a life that is about internal serenity and contentedness. And so friendship on that level is not just interpersonal, it's intrapersonal. So as we seek one another, we are finding ourselves. And it's an ongoing balance and dynamic. As Jung said, it's not all one and not all the other. It's one and the other. So here comes a bit of an attempt at a definition of friendship. Hang on, because it's not a sentence and it's not a paragraph. It's a whole page. And again, this is something I love to debate with folks. Again, I want to say as a caveat, not as an excuse. I'm not an expert on friendship. No one in this world is. We have our experiences. I've just had the opportunity to write about it and do research and think about it for 2 years. Most folks don't have that opportunity. Friendship is a social relationship of choice. Friendship is a human relationship of mutual affection, trust, and support between two or more people. It is a stronger bond than being associates or acquaintances, but a less intimate bond than being lovers or in a parent-child dyad. Friendship has as its basis common values and some degree shared interests. A friend is someone who demonstrates care, respect, and appreciation for another person, even when there are conflicts between them. I promise we'll come back to conflict. Friends are able to process their disagreements with kindness, or at least they're able to come back to kindness as their challenges become resolved. A friend is someone who often knows you better than you know yourself. With a friend, one is able to grow into a better relationship with themselves. A friend has your own best interests at heart and will stand with you. A friend will consistently honor their commitments to you. They will accept you in your times of difficulty and struggle. A friend neither leads nor follows, but is alongside as much as possible. A friend will remind you of your strengths when you've lost track and will be available to you in your times of weakness. A friend is someone who has earned your trust. Being a friend is not always easy, as there is social work involved to grow and maintain both sides in a friendship. Being in a friendship is rewarding because it involves choosing love and care over self-interest. So I'd like to take a quick time out on that and invite feedback, questions, reactions, responses. Yes, please. Oh.
I'm interested in the role of trust and loyalty in a friendship that allows for exchanges that might otherwise be very difficult to express or hear. Trust and loyalty.
I'm going to start off with a metaphor. So for you who are watching, this is a rubber band. I hope you can see it. So I want to say, and I write about this extensively as my way of coming into trust, that rubber bands and friendship are very similar.
Talk about.
Rubber bands are able to contain anything within them. Rubber bands provide a safe container. For the most part, you can trust that a rubber band will do what it's intended to do. Same with friendship. Trust is something that is learned and earned more than it is given. So for trust to occur in a friendship, I think it takes time, continuity, and consistency. We develop trust with one another by proving ourselves time and again that we are there for them, for that person. And by there, I mean emotionally present, attentive, and supportive. One way of breaking that trust is to waffle or waver. In the same way, a rubber band, much as it can adapt and move and stretch and contract, it can also snap. So can friendships. There are things that happen or have happened to all of us in friendship. And I can speak for myself that we consider to be transgressions. Things that people say or do, whether intentionally or not, where we say to ourselves, that's unforgivable. Now, in a friendship that's been going on for a long lifetime, we may find ways to come back to it and come back around to it because the trust is so strong. In newer friendships or friendships that are based on one or two or even three specific things, it's easier for that friendship to snap apart. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it's an important thing to consider that I would say for myself that trust is the bedrock for friendship. And that if there's a question of trust on one side or the other, we have something else other than friendship. Not that that's not valuable. It may be. But then I would ask, is that true, genuine, mutually beneficial friendship? I think we all have to make that decision for ourselves. I don't know if that gives you a
It
heads up.
does, especially about the idea of if a trust is broken, that it snaps, the friendship. The reason I'm bringing that up is because if you have trust with a friend, they can tell you things that otherwise would be unspeakable. And that in a very casual relationship, no one would bring it up.
Mhm.
But you could say, as your good friend, I need to tell you, ... And it would be accepted, included, and it would be safe. There's something safe about a friendship. And as you said, it's different from parent-child as we go from dependency to autonomy to nurturing in our development. The friendships are somehow like a peer group, even if the ages might be different. And to be able to foster friendship, as you said, you need to show up. That's the loyalty part.
Yes, right. I'd like to jump ahead into the book to get to your question a little bit more deeply. Chapter 8, Into Me You See, Intimacy Part 1. I'm going to talk about intimacy here, and I want to play with this. So we're all familiar with the word intimacy, but I want to kind of stand it on its head for a minute. Play with the way we think about it. Intimacy, into me, you see. Into me, you see. So that to me is one very profound way of looking at intimacy. Let me go a little further. I'm quoting from myself. Intimacy is different for each of us. There is no one prescription or formula for defining intimacy. What may be said is that intimacy is about several generalized aspects of being human. In whatever ways it plays out in our friendships, intimacy expresses itself through our behaviors and activities on a daily basis throughout our lives. But it is not simply about how we comport ourselves in our friendly relations and our friendships. Intimacy is also a series of attitudes. It is about the ways we believe, feel, and think about the people with whom we are close. This is a different level of human manifestation. It is internal. We strive to live with these attitudes. Our attitudes are most often what serve to motivate and inspire us into our actions and behaviors. Intimacy is about one's life, vision, and mission. The desire for relational intimacy is what moves us toward, into, and through, and then more deeply into friendship. In sharing intimacy, people have the potential to bring out the best in one another, as well as to bring out the best in themselves. Overall, intimacy is about making choices and decisions on who and what we care about most in our human connections and connectedness. Now, I think an intimate friendship is extremely special and perhaps extremely rare. Not all friendships are intimate, but that doesn't mean they're not friendships. But when we are intimate with someone, it means that we can trust, as you suggested, we can trust ourselves with them to share things that would be otherwise unspeakable. Things that break our heart, things that feel like they're outside of ourselves. In short, we can share our shadow with others with whom we're intimate. In other friendships, we're a bit more guarded, and we need to be. But over the course of time, as trust and loyalty evolve, the guard comes down. And that's for many of us. Others of us do not define friendship as intensively as I'm getting at here. This is a psychological dive. Other people are very happy with what I might call a less evolved or a less intimate friendship. Now, I don't mean to be judgmental, but again, if you heard my attempt at a definition of friendship, I have a pretty high bar. And that's what divides friendship for me away from acquaintances, collegial relationships, even familial relationships. We're not all friends with all of our family members. Many of us are not anything with some of our family members. But because that's not a relationship of choice. As I said earlier, friendship is a relationship of choice. And there's beauty and there's power and there's poignance in that. I choose you, you choose me. Not necessarily as a wedded couple, but as friends for part of our journey, a long part of our journey, most of our journey, all of our journey. Think about your friendships. Again, like a rubber band, can they stretch through the course of a lifetime, right? And think about who you are now, and think about going back and meeting an elementary school classmate of yours. What's there? Certainly 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years of difference, of going away. Can you come back? And if you do come back, what are you coming back to? What are they coming back to? It's a rare event indeed when after 50 or 60 years, you can reconnect in a way that brings that friendship from the distant past into the immediate present. So I don't know what you think about the connection or the metaphor between rubber bands and friendship, but the more I think about it, the more I see some parallels. So that's what I want to say about intimacy. Does anyone else want to say anything about that piece of this before I move on? Okay, the 7-second rule. I will move on. Let's see. I'd like to talk a little bit about longing and belonging. Many years ago, when I was a dean at a college, that we wanted to find a way. There was a liberal arts major at this college, and we were seeing that students, this was at a community college in Massachusetts, we were seeing that students in this particular major had the highest attrition rate of all the majors in the college. And I decided to try an experiment. I created a course, I have to say, with the blessing and the agreement of faculty. You don't create courses at a college or university without the blessing of faculty. It had their blessing and their active engagement. And I called the course Longing and Belonging, because what I thought in my mind is that these students really needed to feel like they belonged at this institution. And they were longing for that. But they didn't have the same kind of collective identity. The major was very obtuse, it was very diverse, it was very open-ended and so on. And so they didn't bond with their classmates much as, say, psychology majors would or biology majors would, who would see each other in class after class after class. I don't want to take credit for this because we had to look at this from a number of different optics, but within 5 years, that major shot from the lowest to one of the highest in terms of retaining students. And I think that's because at its core, as human beings, as relational beings, we have a longing to belong. Let me read here. Each of us longs for things, people, and experiences that hold meaning and value for us in our lives. Longing is both a psychological and physiological aspiration. It is not a craving, nor is it an addiction. It is more akin to a yearning, something we can wish and hope for, even dream about, but not at the level of psychological or physical addiction. We set up our lives in such a way that what we yearn for has the possibility of being achieved. This is what Abraham Maslow refers to in his fifth zone in his hierarchy, which he terms self-actualization. This lifelong process does not mean that we will reach or receive our longings over the course of our lives. Sadly, many of us will sacrifice core elements of ourselves, our integrity, our values, our convictions, even our physical and emotional safety, out of a deep-seated longing that may become irrational over time and fall into the netherland of craving and addiction. This is when we become unsafe to ourselves, speaking off the book. This is when people sometimes sell out because they have lost control of moderation in their lives, and they will give anything or everything to have X, Y, or Z. Once we do that, we get off our course, we get off our mission, we get off our vision. And yet for that moment, something is drawing us so strongly that we lose ourselves. No matter our walk of life, many of us may feel tempted or challenged at one time or another to let go of something or someone important, out of our longing for someone or something else that we may temporarily at least consider more important or more attractive. This happens in intimate relationships, even in marriages all the time. It may be one reason why people have affairs. In our state of longing, we may be focused on one or more perspectives. This may be an attitude in which we long for something or someone. It may be an action through which we manifest the yearning that is enveloping us at that moment. Often the two are indistinguishable. It can be valuable to ferret out their differences simply to understand more about each element of longing. So again, we are emotional beings. As I said on Friday, I want to use the word emotion and break it down. Emotion is about energy in motion. And to that extent, as human beings, we are always in motion. If it's not physical, it's mental. I know that as a longtime practitioner of meditation, one of the most difficult things in meditation is first to calm the body and then to calm the mind. That can be extremely difficult, so much so that the dropout rate in addictions, not in addictions, in meditation is very high because we are in motion in one way or another all the time. That's what we're used to. Even the mind moves when it's dreaming. So the idea of longing is inherent in the human condition. What we have learned, and that's where friendship comes in, is that if we're always in motion and always in movement, where is there room for continuity, consistency, stability, and so on? That comes from holding. That comes from those moments of stillness with another human being. And friendship, to me, is about movement and motion to stillness and serenity on a continuum, and the opportunity, like a windshield wiper, to move back and forth between them. That's chapter 5 on longing and belonging. Let's see, what time is it?
It's 10:04.
Okay. I'd like to move on then because of time. And I wanted to get into an area that is challenging for people. And this is conflict. I'm a believer in the Kelman-Thomas theory of conflict, in that they talk about conflict with a word that I like. I've never been a fan of conflict resolution. I mean, I like the idea, but I think it's highly theoretical because there are conflicts that cannot be resolved. Whether it's a war within oneself or across nations and religions and ethnicities, we know that there are some wars that are ongoing, and one may doubt that they can be resolved peaceably. Two words that I prefer, conflict response and conflict transformation. And so I think that all conflicts deserve a response, whether or not it can lead to resolution. And I believe that the process, and here I'm talking about friendship, as I said earlier, the process of working through conflict is transformative. And here we'll talk about a Venn diagram, which looks something like this, if you can see what I'm doing. In the middle of these two circles that are interposed on each other are the two people in a friendship. On the outside is you and me, people, the two people in it. So the Venn diagram pulls those together. Conflict can transform the dyad, the two people in that friendship, by bringing them to a different level. It also can transform each individual for having seen themselves stretch and stress themselves beyond what they thought they could do. So I want to say that there is an upside to conflict. Friends have the potential to respond to and resolve conflict because of their commitment to one another. This is about the trust and the loyalty that we talked about earlier. Beyond the mere instance of responding and potentially resolving conflict within their friendship, however, working through the conflict successfully has the possibility of transforming the friendship. Adversity may yield greater depth of connection if it is handled respectfully and with integrity. Friends may experience the benefit of greater intimacy when they succeed at negotiating the challenges of conflict
Mm.
with mutual respect. Each person in a friendship stands to grow as they see themselves entering and exiting conflict following its successful conclusion. In addition to gaining greater respect for one another, each friend may also experience self-appreciation and affirmation when there is a positive outcome. Two of the most difficult things to remember about being in conflict with a friend is that conflicts are inevitable and that they have the power to transform each of us and our friendships. I talked about this briefly at my other book talk, but I'm a strong believer that conflict is inevitable between people. And a few years ago, I went around the US on a tour of colleges and universities, giving a program that I titled, "Conflict is a Terrible Thing to Waste." Because I think that most of us, and there's reasons for this, most of us are avoidant when it comes to conflict. We were never taught systematically or even randomly how to deal with conflict. And what happens is that we become fearful when someone disagrees with us, and we go up what's called the conflict escalator. Now that's competition, isn't it? When we go up like this, we're heading for some kind of zero-sum game. One wins, the other loses, but really both lose, I think. But avoidance is the opposite of competition. What happens in avoidance is someone comes at you with, and it could be a friend, comes at you with something where you strongly disagree. Whether or not there's trust in the relationship and loyalty, the question becomes, what do I do now? How do I react? How do I respond? And what I find is that many people don't know how to do it. It's not their fault. We're also not taught how to listen. So what happens when you're first told, shut up and listen? We don't know what to do. We might know what shut up means. But do we really know what listen means? So in the same way, I want to say that that learning to deal with conflict, even though it's inevitable, is something we come to sometimes by luck, sometimes through careful mentoring, I think a lot of times through love. And it presents a challenge to change. Not all change is bad. I believe that transformation is the life process that enables us to grow at every stage of our lives. In fact, we cannot continue to remain as we are or as we once were. As creatures of habit and routine, most of us prefer the comfort and security of knowing that what is will remain that way if we want it to. But here is where change becomes most challenging. We are not in control. As human beings, we are unable to predict, manipulate, or control all of the variables in our relationships to ensure a process and conclusion that is to our liking. This is scary for some and exciting to a few. People have a tendency to lose hope over things in life that are beyond their ability to control and change. One can think about politics in that same regard. Because by its very nature, interpersonal conflict is interactive, there's always another side, our friend's side, to consider. Try as we may, we cannot control their side of things. So another pause point to see if anyone has any thoughts, questions, or comments about the power and the universal aspect, if you will, of conflict and friendship. I'd love to hear what people have to say about their experiences with their conflicts and friendship. Any thoughts? Linda, please.
This was someone that I considered a very good friend at one time. Unfortunately, she drank. She was quite ill, and then she had a second chance. And I had to terminate the friendship because she still continued her drinking. She would not.
Ways now.
Hmm?
Carry
She
on.
would, oh, she wouldn't We tried an intervention. We tried to let her know that she was loved, that we cared about her. And I really felt bad that I just could not watch her basically disintegrate. It just was too emotionally difficult. And she passed away several years ago. But I just was very sorry that I couldn't continue that friendship.
It sounds like your rubber band snapped at that point.
That's
in the-
from what you said. Yes, I think it finally gave way.
Right, and I don't want to diminish that by, suggesting that you and she are both rubber bands, but what was holding it together, it just could not continue. There was
The mutuality was gone.
the mutuality, and to some extent the trust, because of inconsistency of behavior and approach and so on. And this can happen, and it's never an easy decision, is it?
No.
To let go. It's never an easy decision. And yet we can still also hold on to what was precious about that friendship at another point along the way. The breakup of a friendship does not have to be throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Now, I know people in marriages where the divorces have been so, how shall we say politely, unkind, that people want to have nothing to do with that other person whatsoever. But if the marriage had been bad from the get-go, one wonders why they got married. Now, arranged marriages might be a little different, but in this country, we generally don't have arranged marriages. Other parts in the world, of course, those are, if not prevalent, certainly more commonplace. But in friendship, again, it's a choice, it's a choosing of two people. And then, as you suggested, over time, we just get closer if we put in the social work. But there can be transgressions. Conflict is inevitable. Sometimes, as in your case, we choose not to do the work to resolve it because not all conflict can be resolved. You responded to the conflict, but that was a choice to say, I need to let it go. That's a response. It's not a resolution. And I think that can be an outcome in friendship. We can let go.
And I think in this particular case, what gets pointed out is that both people saw the conflict transformation possibility differently. I mean, your friend maybe thought that the transformation was, I can be as drunk as I want and still have you as my friend.
Mhm.
And your vision of the transformation was, I want more of you. I just don't want this facade that comes through when you're drinking too much. So what you both saw as a potential resolution and or transformation were two different to come together. You didn't want the same thing.
Thank you.
She wanted to keep drinking. I mean, I've got friends like that too, but usually it's a heavier duty drug than alcohol. But regardless, same difference. You know, seeing where you're headed out of the conflict to peace again, to some kind of agreement, can be really different. So, you know, the end point might be that separation. Sorry.
Any thoughts on that, Linda? Because you've been hearing from a couple of us.
I appreciate that. It's I always felt really bad that she, basically lost her life, that it finally did kill her when she had the opportunity. But I went to her funeral, and again, just, but thank you, everybody. For all
I'll get to you in a moment, Anita, and then to Shay. Yeah. But what I want to say in your experience, which is commonplace, is that we remember. we remember. And we can come back to those places where the memories are sacrosanct and sacred and special. And the hurt that we may have felt still remains. And the love perhaps as well. It may not mean that we're able to continue in the same vein, but nor does it mean that we have to erase what we experienced. Let's go to Anita and then we'll go to Shay, who's here.
Yeah, in response to Linda's situation, I think part of that is just the pain of seeing someone you love kill herself and being totally powerless to do anything about it. Whereas the friend was powerless to stop her drinking, but Linda was powerless to stop her friend from drinking. And just that pain of watching people you love destroy themselves, you have to sometimes just separate from that to protect yourself.
Thank you, Anita. It can be unbearable. It can be unbearable. And sometimes we have to step away because we can't bear to hold that pain with another person. And sometimes we can. So I appreciate that. Let's go to Shay. Comment, question?
I had a similar experience, but not quite so extreme. I have a friend who I love her to death. I've known her since high school. She's extremely gifted, extremely brilliant, very creative. And I fell in love with who she is, who I got to know her as. But oftentimes when she has trouble, she would resort to drinking, to being high, to taking other drugs. And then arguably, she's not the same person that I established that friendship with. And so that's not fair to then turn it around and ask me to hold up my end of the bargain, so to speak, or my end of the relationship when she's fundamentally changing hers. So I'd say that that's another piece of the puzzle is who is this person I'm friends with, and do they remain that way, you know?
Mm-hmm. The question is, therefore, how strong is the rubber band? Can it contain everything? Or is it to a certain degree situationally dependent on a certain set of behaviors, beliefs, and attitudes? And if one jumps outside of that, can the relationship handle that? And that is a question of choice. And there's no way to judge. No one else can be the judge of that except you. And that does happen when we see someone go through a behavioral or a personality change, whether it's because of drugs or alcohol or anything else. They can become, as you suggested, a fundamentally different person. And that other person may be at odds with who you are, whereas when they're in their righteous space, that's what the basis of the friendship is. And so that becomes an inflection point for each of us to say, you know, there's a container, one more time, to the friendship, and things are based on that. But and we are given to change. We know that, you know, life is both an evolution and a revolution at the same time. And are we able to not only tolerate, but embrace with grace the changes that we and other people, our friends, go through? Let's go to the rabbi and then to you. Yeah.
So you've talked about stresses on a friendship. I'd like to look at the other side. I'm thinking about army buddies who have allies in times of danger, and how a friend can see you through a time when you're very vulnerable. And if there's gossip about you, they can stand up for you. If you are falling down physically, emotionally, spiritually, they can literally stand with you. And the idea of being an ally for situations that are bigger than the one person can handle, I think that's a very big part of friendship.
That's a wonderful thought. And I say that that's about as far outside my personal experience as one can get. But, you know, in the trenches, people will refer to their buddies or their allies as, you know, friends of the heart, because, you know, they could be in a life-saving situation together. And in a way, that's a pretty strong level of intimacy right there, to see your life, your vulnerability exposed to the point where you can die in any given instant. The question that I would raise is, I think that's a certain kind of friendship, which I would say would be situational or circumstantial. And that's not to take anything away from it, but it is, and it can be even evolved over a short period of time. And so I look at that and say, yes, to that person, absolutely, that's a very deep and powerful friendship, and is certainly based on trust and loyalty. Will it withstand, other changes that are inevitable
When they come home.
when they come home?
Right.
Will it? Now, sometimes
Best
it
years of our
does.
lives. Remember that movie?
Right. Sometimes it does. And that becomes a memorable friendship. Oftentimes for situational or circumstantial friendships, they exist in that period of time or in that space and time. And for all the goodness they are, that's what they are. Doesn't mean that once we lose them or step outside of them, that something bad happened. It's just a different definition. Appreciate that. Let's go to your thought.
Here we are in the synagogue, and it always strikes me as a challenge when there are conflicts, or to sort of define our relationship as a congregation, because we sort of fall somewhat within a family. Sometimes I think of it as friends. Sometimes I think of it as just a collegial relationship, right? And so depending on what we each perceive our relationship, it does make a difference, I think, in terms of how we approach conflicts, right? So I'm just wondering, since you have studied this both from a scholarly perspective, but also as a member of a synagogue, what your thoughts are on that subject.
It's a great question, and it certainly speaks to your, and I think most congregants' experience anywhere. And yeah, I've been in all manner of conflicts myself in our synagogue, and it is a challenge because people bring different things to that institution. Religious institutions are incredibly complex beings because people have all manner of reasons to come to them and to stay within them, and all different manner of visions and missions about what they want from them. It's a little different than a one-to-one friendship, isn't it? Because when we come together with a friend, it's easier to define for each of us what's bringing us together. The complexity of a synagogue or any religious institution is that the motivations may be wildly different. And then within that, the conflict itself may be seen in very, very different ways by different people. And I think the thing to be able to do is to be able to call it what it is, which is to say it's a conflict. And it's not necessarily an interpersonal conflict between you and me. It's either circumstantial or situational, but it can bring us back to core values, right? In that I hold as a value for this conflict something that's very strong, and to go outside of that is a transgression that I cannot tolerate. But it's really ultimately, I hope, more about positions than it is people. And that's a difficult thing for people to see. And I keep coming back to, because I've been called in too many times by my congregation and others to resolve those kinds of situations. And I have to help people to disaggregate the people involved centrally to the conflict to the situations that are in the conflict. And if you could begin to tease that out, and let me give an example because it might be useful. I used to teach for a college in the Boston area, where I had the privilege to teach in Israel every summer. And it was, interestingly enough, it was a course in conflict. And this was a program in Netanya. And for a couple of years, they were able to bring in not only Israelis, but Palestinians to this program. And well, that's kind of tailor-made, isn't it, to deal with conflict? And, the sexy part of learning about conflict transformation, resolution, whatever, is to engage in the role plays and the situations and the circumstances and, share what you've learned and prove to other people that you have some facility in that skill. Well, they, of course, the time and time again, the students were unable to listen to each other. You know, I could stop and they'd be just banging on each other, right? And so, you know, what I took a real risk. And I said, we can't go on to part 2 of this until you can demonstrate that you're able to do part 1, which is to listen. And to listen, you have to listen to both the person and the position. They were so invested in only focusing on that people were different than them, that they couldn't even hold the idea that we have different positions that we can work on. I don't just hate you, but I hate what you think. And what happened was when I said that, it was like a miracle, because then both sides decided to gang up on me. And I couldn't have hoped for anything better, because what happened then is that they started listening to each other. And then they were starting to listen to their positions. Why do they think, you know, I'm not the one to teach this course, that I'm the one who lacks competency and skill and blah, blah, blah. But as soon as I could see that they were taking parts of each other's sentences and evolving and developing and so on, I thought, the problem has at least been responded to and possibly resolved. It's the only outcome that could have maybe worked. And that's because they began to listen to positions. And to come back to the issue now in an individual synagogue or religious institution, if you're able to get people to listen to the positions and not get into how they feel about the people, I think there becomes hope to move forward with that. And you can follow a different process that's not definitely a dead loss, because people don't have to like each other in a synagogue, but they have to respect each other and they have to understand what the conflict is and how to respond to the conflict. That's what I've come up with at this point. And I don't know how that might be helpful to your congregation.
Yes.
But
Yes,
that,
sounds
come
about
back to the position viewpoint.
absolutely. And in,
You both ended up having a common goal, getting rid of you.
Were they successful?
no, they were not. They were successful in getting the course that they wanted. And this happened not once and not twice, but 3 times. It didn't always happen that way. And then again, they didn't always start off in absolute conflict with each other. But when they did, I learned that I will sacrifice myself for the greater good of the group. They weren't going to send me away in any event, but they felt like they had the power to. And in that, to me, was the power to bring people together. So I've only got a few more minutes, I think, and then I'll take time with folks who are here, and I also want to hear from you out there. If you have any comments or questions as I begin to close the talk. In the book, I decided to make myself vulnerable, as friends do with each other, and this is a different kind of vulnerability, because as opposed to teaching, when you write a book, you don't know who's going to read it, and you don't have any control over what they say, think, respond, say to other people. In a classroom, unless it's a virtual classroom, you have some greater degree of control at the moment because you're with people in 3D. So I opened myself up in the book by writing 3 case studies. And I took myself to task as a psychologist and said, all right, I'm going to just share things with other people that don't necessarily bring out my greater, better side, but they bring out honesty and they bring out, the fact that we're all working on ourselves all the time. And I chose 3 very, very different friendships because I think that all of our friendships are unique, but I went across the continuum. And to me, one of the more interesting chapters and the longest chapter is about an intercultural relationship that I had with a student I got to know very deeply from Afghanistan, a younger woman. And this was a course that I was teaching in Kathmandu in Nepal almost 10 years ago. And when you line those 2 people up, myself up and this other person, and you look at, our identities, I think about the only thing that you might say where there was some commonality, maybe 2 things. One is that we're alive as human beings. And the second is that we learned how to care about each other as human beings. But almost every other identifiable identity was different. And in the book, I talk about something called power asymmetry. And I think many friendships have this to a greater or lesser degree. And what power asymmetry is that we each come into a relationship not necessarily as complete peers and equals, but with different levels of education and money and power and age and all kinds of other things. Status, things that make us unequal in the eyes of the status quo of society and culture. And we have to be able to resolve that to a certain extent, in order to show that we care. Because if we only stay in those identities, there's nothing that adds up. And so that particular chapter was fascinating to me and probably the most difficult to write because I had to have her words live and my words. And so I had to find ways of bringing her into this conversation, at least as my equal. Not an easy thing to do when you're writing about someone who is half the world away. And sadly, I won't give you the spoiler alert, but that became a huge challenge to maintain. And so we all have those kinds of friendships where we wonder, how can I bridge the gap or the gulf? And working through that was one of the most profound experiences in my life. And that was one of the case studies. Another one which was an intergenerational friendship with a young man for whom I have spent, let me do the numbers on this, 37 years now as a big brother. Now, most big brother, little brother relationships may last a year or 2 or 3 or maybe 5. This one has lasted 37. And so I talk about how that power asymmetry over time was dissolved. And the power of that, of seeing this young 7-year-old boy more and more become my equal, never in terms of age. We're still a generation apart and we will be all the time. But as he grew in ways that we could discuss. You saw the gap and the status quo and the asymmetry beginning to erase itself. And that too is a very powerful experience. And the third one is a friend who actually could have been and maybe should have been my older brother, someone who is about 9 or 10 years my senior. But in most ways, we have a lot of similarities. And so looking at that involved a different skill set than looking at difference. Looked at similarity and what does that mean? So I'd like to read you something from my third case study and then open it up to closure with all of you. When friends bring the most important qualities, such as safety, trust, protection, truth, and love into their friendships, a greater degree of interdependence is born. As long as these critical qualities are present, our sense of interdependence is ripe for sharing and growing together. When two people in an equal partnership truly trust and care for one another, there is a bond that is stronger than metal and yet as tender as streaming tears. When we become inter but not codependent with one another, we see, seek, and offer the mutual caring and sharing that makes us stronger both individually and as friends. Terms such as mutuality, cooperation, collaboration, close rapport, and deep connectedness come to mind. I've often referred to several of my deepest friendships as gifts that keep on giving. It's not that I mean that I only enjoy and appreciate being given to. That's an aspect, surely, but the giving here means to me the larger gift of presence, energy, and attention. These benefits allow me to give as well. Friendship becomes a combined pool of fresh running water that each can dip into or replenish as they find necessary and appropriate. So again, there's much more in the book than I can offer you here, but I want to come to a place where you have time to think about the bigger picture that I presented, react, respond, speak from your own experience, and then we'll call it a day. So again, it's a small crew of folks, and I just want to be available and open to what you might want to bring forward. Any thoughts, questions? Yes, Linda.
Is it when you say a best friend, can you have more than one best friend?
Well, I can speak personally from this. My research tells me nothing about this. I
Okay.
could say that it's conflicted. I think you can have more than one best friend. And I'll tell you why. I think that in a moment of crisis or conflict, deep conflict, my question is, who can you turn to? And I said the word can. I don't think that everyone has or will have more than one best friend. But the way I've decided to lead my life is that I want to have options available to me, and I'm willing to put in the social work and the time and the vulnerability and the love to cultivate more than one best friend. You know, and of course, you know, a wife or a spouse, a partner can be a best friend, but you can also have someone else as a best friend too, with whom you can share your shadow as well as other aspects of yourself. For other people, you know, a best friend is the apex of everything. And so I think that is a very personal question ultimately, but I have a certain sense of openness around the fact that a best friend doesn't have to just be one BFF. It can be more than one.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes, Anita.
Throughout the whole talk, I've been kind of dealing, and this may be totally outside the purview of what you're writing and what you're talking about, but a relationship with God. I just see so many of these things, the trust, the safety, the co-creation. You know, the one thing is listening, because it's really hard for me to like listen. Okay, God, give me a clue. What do you know? That's been really hard. But so much of what we're talking about in terms of human friends, I see also with my relationship with Hashem. And
Abraham.
you know, last week in Noah, we talked about Noah walked with God, and then we talked with Abraham about Abraham walked before God. I'd rather walk with God, but is that anything that you could fit into what you've been teaching?
What a great question, and what a topic for another book. I know that Abraham would be considered to be a friend of God. And again, our relationship with God, in whatever name you would offer, this is where you go from universal to unique. It would be very hard for me in my training to be summative here. Can one be friends with God? I have no clue. Just to be completely naked and honest in front of all of you, I think that so much depends on the relationship that one has with the divine, from one's training, one's viewpoint, one's perspective, one's experience, one's observations. And I would leave open the possibility, but I would leave it to more learned people to help with that question. All I would say is, I think it's possible. I would wonder if that's a friendship. I would wonder if the dyadic between a human being and God is friendship. And even if it's human to human, some people may say it is, some people would violently or virulently disagree with that. I think it raises questions that are beyond the scope of my understanding and beyond the scope of my book. But I have a lot to learn on that, and I'm glad you raised it. I'm not the person to give a full answer to that. Thank you for asking. Does anyone else
next
have a
book.
response there? Sorry, maybe, but I have a lifelong of learning before I'm able to write that one. I don't know if anyone else has a response to that. I don't think there's an answer. There might be a response. Anybody? Let's go to Shay.
That kind of actually leads into a question that I had, which is it true that the best basis for a romantic relationship is friendship? And to answer the previous question, I've noticed lately actually that all of my closest relationships in life and the way that I fundamentally approach things is through, for me, the feeling of friendship. So for me, my relationship with God feels like a friendship.
Mhm.
My relationship with my mother feels like a friendship. And my relationship with my partner feels like a friendship. So but that has to do with what you said. It's what's our natural, how were we raised? What's the way that we personally look at things? So I don't know if that's unique to me, if that's a universal, but that's been my experience.
Well, we live from our experience. So, that is the kind of if there's an equation or a formula, that's what's worked for you. Friends, whatever the other roles that someone brings, friendship is what unites all these people with you. There are many different ways, to come back to your first part of your question, to enter into and be able to sustain and maintain a romantic relationship. I can only say from my research, my observation, and my experience, that becoming friends with a romantic partner is incredibly important for maintaining and sustaining the friendship. At some point, many of us take the time to become friends before we become romantic. Others of us become romantic, and out of that romance grows a friendship. I think it can happen either way. What brings them together is that at some point in time, in that dyad, in that relationship, friendship emerges. And it's a friendship of choice. Now, it's a little different if one considers married relationships, which are set up, arranged marriages. And I don't have an answer to that, because that's outside my personal purview and even my research. But again, there, I believe it's possible. I mean, I can go back to the Tevye story.
Right,
with
do
Fiddler
you
on the
love
Roof,
Yeah.
who I'm proud to say was written by one of my relatives, right? Shalom Aleichem. But nevertheless, that's fun to drop in. But in that, you look at those relationships that were and were not arranged. And certainly Tevye is a relationship that I think was arranged. And it's possible. I mean, they became friends over time. But it's also possible that they can grow apart, be married, and live parallel lives. So I think, again, that's the magic and the mystery, the indefinable, if you will, that allows for friendships to evolve over time or to live parallel lives. Now, in a romantic relationship, if all you're living is a parallel life with that partner, it becomes a question. Shall we stay together or not? Is that enough? Is there more? And again, that moves from the universal to the unique. It's up to each person in that dyad. And in some cultures, it's not up to each person. The woman can't make the choice. She's not allowed, because of cultural variables or cultural taboos, to leave the marriage. Or if she does, it's at the risk of her own life. So that's the way I would come to it. The thing that can hold a romance together, I think, is that there is a friendship, whether one comes into that friendship over time, or if one starts with a friendship first and then it blossoms into romance. That would be the way I would respond.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other thoughts, questions, or whatever before we wrap up and say good afternoon?
We have someone who's, okay, Susan Weisberg says to everyone in chat, I think, oh, hold on just a sec, I just lost it. I think some people may feel that it is impossible to be friends with Hashem because each of us is so dependent on Hashem, and such a small part of the entirety of Hashem's being. However, I believe that Hashem depends on our evolution of return. And therefore, we are each in a friendship with Hashem.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to weigh in about, and I think it has a lot to do with, our own personal definition of Hashem and God, and how we see that being, and how do we define ourselves. So this might be an interesting thing to talk about as a congregation.
And you know what my favorite song is with everybody? Shalom Chaverim. Hello, my friends. Shalom Chaverim. Shalom Chaverim. Shalom.
Shalom.
Lehitraot. Shalom. Shalom. Goodbye, my friends. Goodbye, my friends. Goodbye. We'll see you again. We'll see you again. Shalom. Shalom.
What a perfect ending.
Well, that about sums it up, doesn't it? End with a song, and a song like that, that's so universal.
Thank you so much, man.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all for being here.
You.